Welcome this afternoon as we have coverage on the 64th sitting of the 12th Parliament. As we are looking at what is happening in the Parliament, I have with me none other than Member of Parliament, Mr. Danish Maipal, who, if you were following us earlier, he just gave a superb presentation on the floor as they dealt with the motion to deal with the standing orders. And before we get in, because we have a lot of things that we want to talk to Mr. Maipal about, let us start with that motion. Let's talk about, what was the importance, because I gather that you are supporting if I'm correct, some amendments to that motion. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Shanika. Let me say first of all that the importance of the motion was to simply give a timeline to the clerk and speaker with reference to the amount of days they take to approve questions and motions submitted by members of parliament. And in any democracy, it is expected that you act with alacrity, that you act with expedience, because our functions in the National Assembly has to do with the people's business.
Correct.
For the past 3 years or thereabout that we have been sitting in the National Assembly, we have recognized that this speaker seems to not be acting in a manner to consider the people's business as most important. And against that backdrop, we submitted a motion in my name seeking to amend the standing orders to provide 4 days, a motion and question, to be with the speaker and 4 days with the clerk. What that simply means is that I, as a member of parliament, if there is a burning issue on the floor or a burning issue elsewhere, I will submit a question or a motion seeking answers on whatever the issue may be. And I'm simply asking that it spend 4 days with the clerk, who will check and ensure that it is in keeping with the standing orders, and then submit it to the speaker for him to further check an additional 4 days, and then we be notified. In this case, I will be notified if my motion or question is properly constructed and fit for a notice paper before being placed on an order paper. That is how simple the motion was. But what we saw in the National Assembly was the People's Progressive Party being against such a motion, and they went into a whole different barrage of argument that caused us to do nothing else but retaliate and rebut, which I think we did superbly well with, and the motion was defeated because they have the numbers. But I put them on notice that when they sit in the opposition, they will have to deal with it that way, because, as I said in my presentation, their days are numbered, primarily because of the manner in which they're handling the people's business. They're not dealing with it with the people's mind. They're not taking the people's consideration. They're not taking their job as important to consider the people's business. They're just doing it for themselves, their friends, and their families.
Correct, is right. And I know in your presentation, the argument, even from the other MPs, we heard, giving examples of how long it is taking for certain things to be. You're hearing stuff that were presented in January till April. And, really and truly, the motion is to ensure that there is a timely passage of things to do. So that the National Assembly,
the issues that come up for discussion are relevant. The relevancy of the matter is important. The whole nature of dealing with current affairs. Can you imagine that there were matters that were so important at the time, and 80 days after the submission of the questions and motions, then is when it is approved? The relevancy doesn't stay. Because with this PPP administration, there's a new issue every single day. Every single day under this People's Progressive Party, there are issues affecting the people, and new ones come every single day. We should have parliament every single day.
On that note, talking about, new rising issues, the other thing that was striking today, and at this time, I know our viewers are tired hearing and seeing the same thing happen at the National Assembly. There was a motion as well brought, I think, in your name as well today for the Parliament to discuss the issue of the rule, to merely, I guess, to ask the government to, abide by the ruling of the court in the case of the issue with Exxon EPA situation. And again, we saw the Speaker of the House disallowing that motion. Let's talk about that.
Everybody knows that Speaker Manzoor Nadir is a puppet of the PPP.
Correct.
Everybody knows that Manzoor Nadir sings for his supper and he receives his supper from the PPP. Everybody knows that. Manzoor Nadir has a track record of ruling motions that we consider of definite urgent public importance. He has a record of ruling them not definite or urgent or of public importance. But in the past, what he did was to always seek to justify why it is not urgent, definite, or of public importance. This morning I was shocked.
Nothing.
Not because he ruled in our favor, but because he ruled outside of our favor, but without justification. All that Manzoor did this morning was to say that a matter was filed in court and this matter is now sub judice, so we can't proceed with it. I was shocked. I remember when we had the suspension of the members of Parliament.
Yeah.
Roysdale Ford walked with the members of Parliament and he filed a matter in the High Court. It was filed the day before the sit-in. And no date was given for the hearing and no judge was assigned. Manzoor Nadir, in his ruling, said that the matter will be proceeded with, notwithstanding the opposition filing their case, primarily because there was no date issued for the hearing and no judge assigned. So that doesn't fit into the category of sub judice. And he went and he quoted a series of precedents from other parliaments. Today, what we see is the real Manzoor. We saw an unpatriotic Manzoor Nadir. We saw a biased Manzoor Nadir. And we saw a PPP Manzoor Nadir in full action. Because all he said was that a case was filed. And we know that no date was given to the case, no judge was assigned to the case. So when it suits him and the PPP, he goes with it. And when it doesn't suit them, he still goes with how he feels it should happen. Manzoor Nadir, listen, Guyana's democracy is broken. There's no doubt about that.
Correct.
But people may ask, why are we still in the National Assembly? This is the avenue, this is the space that allows us to confront these jagabats.
And
it allows us to put it in the record. It allows us to prove to the international community and to the many other democracies around the world what is it that this dictatorial administration is behaving with.
Yes.
So our presence is very important. So notwithstanding all the conundrum and all the biasness and all the other behavior of the government and the speaker, we have to be there to make our points, to register it in the record, and to ensure that when time comes in the future, we have a track record there to reference and to show that we fought for the people amidst all of these behavior of the People's Progressive Party.
As we just talked about the motion, and I now want us to get into the issue of that actual case that was taken up by civil society, as a matter of fact, to court, where they took EPA to court on this matter. And I mean, I think this matter is now hitting home to Guyanese across the board. I have received calls from people who are seemingly sympathetic to the PPP, etc., who are shocked at this move by the government, because clearly any government that literally tries to appeal a case that will secure the people of the country, literally go against it, it is something unheard of.
Yeah, but that the whole essence of the motion was to get the government to accept Judge Sandel Kissoon's ruling and to act within the best interest of the Guyanese people. What Judge Sandel Kissoon did was to simply say that we ought to protect the Guyanese people.
Correct.
In the event that there should be an oil spill, the expense to clean up must not be the Guyanese people's expense. Not a single dollar from the Guyanese people must be used to clean up if there is an oil spill. Yes, there is a $600 million insurance, and there is a $2 billion, I heard, I don't know how true it is, parent company guarantee. But when we look at oil spills around the world, that is not even a percentage of the cost associated with cleanup exercise and restoring a country and an area to normalcy. And we are simply saying that notwithstanding us benefiting from oil resource at this point in time, in the future, for the avoidance of doubt, if there should be an oil spill that can cause catastrophic damage to Guyana, its neighbors, and elsewhere, the expense to clean up, the expense to bring back to normalcy a country and its neighbors and elsewhere must never be the ordinary people of that country, but rather the bigwigs that are milking billions of dollars from that resource. And that is the simple request. All Exxon has to do, Shanika, is to sign on a paper to say that in the event of an oil spill, whatever is the cost to restore the country and its people to normalcy, we will foot the bill. Full stop. That is all. Signed, submitted. That wouldn't cost them a dime. The fact that they don't want to do it is enough to cause Guyanese to worry, because it is as though they don't have confidence in their operation out there, Lisa 1, Lisa 2. Because if they had full confidence in their operation, and if they believed that there will not be an oil spill, then they would sign that document as quick as possible. But it scares me now that ExxonMobil is considering, and their subsidiary, SO Exploration and Production Guyana Limited. And let me tell you something, SO Exploration and Production Guyana Limited, they sign all the documents with Guyana, not Exxon. Exxon sought to secure itself in a corner and put forward a front company called EEPGL. And that company does all the signing. And that company does all the representation. But that is a limited liability company. They don't have assets. And the assets that they are getting now is coming from cost oil. So it is we, the Guyanese people, who are paying for the assets that they have. And every asset that they have at the end of their work, it will come to Guyana. So it belongs to us.
All right. Now, people are saying at this point, with what has transpired, it's a big deal. It's a big issue right now in terms of watching this happen. And, people are saying it could be something for us to seek to have the government removed, because if you're moving against the people of Guyana, then how can you be their sitting government? How do you feel about that?
I agree with you. And I believe that this calls for us to take action against this government that is not operating within the best interest of the people of Guyana, and they should face the consequences of their action, and the people of Guyana should stand up strong against them. And we may even have to contemplate at the level of the National Assembly to bring a no confidence motion against them, because this act of theirs is clearly an unpatriotic one. It is clearly against the wishes of the majority of Guyanese, and it shows that they have no vested interest in the ordinary people of this country. And it makes me wonder if all of them have their bank accounts secure
somewhere
overseas, so that they would not have to face consequences. It's all about wickedness from the PPP, unpatriotic move, and typical PPP behavior. Shameful, disgraceful, unbecoming. It's not what we want as Guyanese people.
I totally agree on that. I know as we proceed in today's sitting, there will be a few other things happening. I think I saw two financial papers are there
That
as
that has
well.
been deferred because of the absence of the finance minister from the sitting. In fact, I have four questions on the order paper for
Mhm,
oral reply from him also, and
mhm.
that has also been deferred because of his absence.
Okay.
There are a couple of bills coming up. Right
Mhm.
now, I think the motor vehicular road
The
traffic
traffic
amendment bill
bill.
is on
Mhm,
the floor. I think there's a trafficking in person bill that is coming up also,
mhm,
and I'm not sure how they will treat with NISA, if they will proceed with the debate first before sending it to the special select committee. But
mhm.
I know it's going to the special select committee, but we have to wait and see because you can't conclude on how this administration operate unless you actually see them making decisions, or you can't depend on them. You can't say that you know what they made a promise and that all
Mhm.
is well. You
And
can't hold them to their word. They're untrustworthy, they're
mhm.
wicked, and they're devious.
Well, with that said, I think we can so with those bills being heard, you think that we have a long day here in Parliament? What are
Nah,
the debates
I think we have
expected to be? I know. Oh,
definitely we have a couple hours more.
the I noted earlier that Minister Broom's former minister was in the Parliament. She left subsequently, and I viewed a live that she gave. I don't know if you were in the house when she sat there today. Were you in the
I
house?
was, yeah, but she was sitting very far from me, so I don't know what
Well,
transpired.
I know that she made the point that Mr. Kwame McCoy, in his usual behavior, as she sat in the parliament, began to heckle across all the way to her. And, it brings the question again where we talk about the issue of heckling in the parliament, the way it is done, and all these things, you know.
Listen, I think Kwame is the most disgraceful minister we have in government, installed albeit. I think he is unfit for the seat that he is holding. I
Mhm.
think he violates all the rules and regulations. He has no decorum, and he is not worth my salt in any way, shape, or form to offer comment on him and his behavior because he's simply a square peg in a round hole.
Well, I'll take that and agree with that. I am thinking that we have our parliamentarian on the ground. At this time, we will shortly switch over to her. Is there anything else you want to add before we close off on this issue?
Well, I would like to say to the Guyanese people that they need to keep their eyes on the debates. I would say that they need to keep their ears on the ground. They need to pay attention to what is happening. Clearly, there are a lot of actions that
Mhm.
are going on where the People's Progressive Party does not have their best interests at heart. We see it in the most recent act of appealing the decision of the High Court,
Mhm.
and it is sad that the people's money is being used for this. They're using the people's money to go and appeal this matter. They've hired Sanjeev Dattadin, one of their own political lackey,
Mhm.
and millions of dollars, I am sure, will be doled out towards him for this case. And it is very, very unfortunate that we are in this situation. The Guyanese people must keep their heads focus and recognize that it is not business as usual. The People's Progressive Party is not worth being in office, and it is time for them to go.
Well, thank you for that.
And I don't know if Andrew may be better able to give us that
Feedback whether
feedback whether everything is going well. Perhaps we could ask
and
Andrew to assist us.
yes, so that we can see what is happening on the house.
Andrew will have to do the switch over for us to get it.
All right. In the meantime, since we do not have the operator here at this moment. Let's talk about some other things that are happening. We see the PPP going across the in areas that they don't usually go across to, and talking and going into villages, paying people to wear jerseys, etc. What are your thoughts on
No,
that?
well, we cannot allow ourselves to be distracted.
Mhm.
Those actions are distraction politics, and distraction politics is what we must not fall for. The People's Progressive Party has a track record of distraction politics. Their attempt to go into these communities that are not in any way supportive of them is to paint a picture to show as though they're all
All-
inclusive when their actions are clear that they have no time with the ordinary citizens. And whilst they seek to give us the crumbs, basically, they hog for themselves the largest part of the pie for them, their families, their friends, and their favorites.
I today I saw the president going to a few villages. He started, I think yesterday we saw him in the Georgetown area, and apparently today he made some moves on the east coast of Demerara. And I took my time to go into my home village while he was there. And some of the notable characters that the village usually don't necessarily associate with are the persons that you're seeing there, and seek to ask questions of them in terms, particularly Pleasance, where we know that the Pleasance had a community ground that was working well, which was pretty much confiscated during the Jagdeo regime, and ask questions about that. And that's what we're seeing. These villages are places that they haven't done much for, but yet still we see them walking into these villages, making attempts, while in the what we're seeing in the local government.
Irfan is a good comedian, you know. Irfan is a good comedian,
We're
and you
seeing,
have to give him credit for being a good comedian. So I guess on that note, Shadika, because I notice I'm getting a
we have
call
and
to
we
go
have
back in the house.
and we have Ms. Geeta Chanandan on the ground, on the floor currently, so we will switch over to the house.
Thank you for having me, by the way.
You're most welcome.
of economic existence. The European Cyclist Federation has argued that the entire EU e-bikes are saving money, time, and CO2 emissions for cities and companies. They're also increasing efficiency, productivity, and in some cases, even providing new jobs. The California Cycling Association has noted the benefits of e-bikes. They have preferred the following points. E-bikes are 10 to 30 times more efficient than electric cars at fighting climate change. E-bikes get 30 to 100 times more miles per pound of battery than an electric car. Battery efficiency essential because the resources used to make lithium batteries may be in short supply as more car manufacturers switch to electric. An e-bike emits 40 to 100 times fewer pounds of greenhouse gases than a 30 mpg gas car. E-bikes are incredible. Point out here that we must have a clear understanding of the environmental, economic, and social benefits of this technological invention, which currently engages our attention. We know that in this new oil and gas context, where a few are taking the cake and 99% is being left behind, these affordable options are important. We on this side of the house, sir, we are very much aware that parents who live in areas where buses cannot access depend on electric bikes to take their kids to school. We're cognizant of the fact that electric bike can be purchased at around 60,000, a far cry for the price of a car which costs around 1.2 million. We also know that a simple charging of a battery can save the cost of expensive fuel and reduce your transportation bill by astronomical numbers. We are well aware that those who live in areas where there are constant traffic jams may need an electric bike to navigate their way through. I know that there are cases where some are not physically able to pedal the normal bikes and may not be able to purchase a car. So we now have a full understanding, listening also to the Honorable Minister, of a full spectrum of this issue and why the need for this amendment. However, sir, nothing must be placed over regulation, safety, and administration of vehicles that traverse our roads. Even in the midst of lawlessness that has descended our society, lawmaking must proceed. This amendment is absolutely necessary. We cannot have a Motor and Vehicles and Traffic Act that does not include provisions for this growing industry. I can only imagine the administrative nightmare that is currently experienced by GRA and the Guyana Police Force. This, Mr. Speaker, it has larger implications for licensing and legal process. By inserting electric bike in this act, I suspect that this confusion will now come to an end. Hence, Mr. Speaker, I cannot see any syllable in this proposed amendment that is worthy of critique or opposition. While we invoke the necessary bipartisanship, we are conscious that this necessary amendment is being completed against the backdrop of a nation that is in complete crisis and confusion. While we demonstrate our support for this amendment, we do this with hearts filled with concern for this nation and its general direction. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Now, the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Mr. Mohabir Anil Nandla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a simple one, but sir, it has very important and wide-ranging impact and ramifications, sir. The Honorable Minister of Home Affairs has done a remarkable job in outlining to us the merits of the bill, what it seeks to do, how it seeks to do it, and, sir, the impact that it will have once enacted. Mr. Speaker, our government, as I have said before, has a legislative agenda that is intended to travel with equal dispatch with the economic and social progress taking place in our country. And I've heard repeatedly, I am recognized for this legislative effort, but I singularly am not responsible. We are a collective on this side, and it is our legislative agenda that we are pushing. And there are some important persons in the background here who I must recognize: Ms. Joanne Bond, Mr. Johnny Fongafat, Melissa Adolphus, Shoshana Lal. Those are the real people who are driving this agenda, and I want to recognize them on the record. So, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to bring bills of different sizes and of different magnitude as we proceed with the transformation of our country. We are not here, sir, to quibble for hours over what a standing order should say and whether we want to strip Your Honor of powers to determine what should be placed on the order paper. We have no time and energy for that. We will dedicate our time and energy to the service of the people of this country in a real and constructive way. And Mr. Speaker, and that is why we are bringing this bill. The Honorable Member, Ms. Geeta Chandan, recognizes, as did the Minister of Home Affairs, that we have had on our roadways for a number of years now these electric cycle, and they have begun to pose a problem because our legal legislative architecture does not, in its current form, caters for them. And there is no way to regulate them. There is no way to bring them within any form of regulatory framework other than by this amendment. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we are here. We are here also, Mr. Speaker, in recognition of the fact that we are losing too many of our citizens on the roadways of our country. And our government will constantly be taking all steps requisite to ensure that we address that matter. To us, Mr. Speaker, unlike those who are obsessed with the oil on that side, to us, the oil is not our most important resource. Our most important resource to us are the people of our country, and we are protecting the people of our country. Mr. Speaker, I read, like Ms. Geeta Chandan, some misplaced objections and criticisms to this bill when it was first publicized. And the impression that I got is that the populace out there is of the impression that we want to ban electric cycles in Guyana. But I had to issue a statement to say that we are not the banning government. The banning government is the PNCR, and they are on that side of the house. We are the government that will bring law and order to activities in the country. And that is what this bill seeks to do. Mr. Speaker, yes. So we recognize the importance of this e-cycle from many perspectives. We recognize its environmental friendly nature. We recognize that it's a cheap source of transportation for those who are less vulnerable, more vulnerable in our society. We also recognize that it is a quick and expedient mode of transportation in our country. So we embrace this mode of transportation, but we thought it fit that it should be brought into regulation. And Mr. Speaker, in this regard, we are emulating countries such as the United Kingdom, Australia, Ireland, and Canada that have enacted recent legislation of this type. Mr. Speaker, the important matter, the important issue that we have to confront in this country is the road, the carnage that is taking place on our roadways. Mr. Speaker, these vehicles alone, based upon the statistics that I received from the Guyana Police Force, the data reveals that 11 persons were killed and 14 other persons suffered significant injuries as a result of the use of electric cycles from 2021 to 2023. That is a completely unaccepted state of affairs. According to the Guyana Police Force, all of the riders of these cycles did not possess any form of vehicular license. Rather, they took advantage of the fact that the Guyana Revenue Authority was not regulating electric cycles. Most times, users of these cycles are not using helmets, thereby exposing themselves to potential injury and even worse, disability or death. Even more frightening is that some of the users are young persons, even persons under the age of 16. Recently, in February of this year, Stabrook News headline dated 18th of February 2023 read, and I quote, "Nonpareil girl 17 on electric bike dies after accident. The cycle was ridden by a 16-year-old female and the pillion rider of 17-year-old had died. It is because of incidents like these, Mr. Speaker, that the bill is before us." So, Mr. Speaker, this bill certainly is an important one, and I'm happy that those on the other side, the honorable members on the other side, have supported the bill. And Mr. Speaker, I seek your kind permission to respond to something that the Honorable Member Mahipal said this morning. Mr. Speaker, I sat down and listened to Mr. Mahipal regale us for nearly 30 minutes about whose days are numbered in this assembly. And he pointed to the June 12th local government elections. And he told us, Mr. Speaker, that those elections will reveal whose days are numbered. Mr. Speaker, I have a GCOM press release. And it says this: for the LAA, the Guyana Election Commission takes this opportunity to inform
Mr.
all
Speaker,
stakeholders that 13 LLAs with a combined total of 98 constituencies and 193 additional constituencies.
Honorable AG, Honorable Member Mr. Mahipal on his feet.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. Comrade Speaker, I stand on Standing Order 41, content of speech. Sir, I never made reference to the June 12th election. I think the Honorable Member is imputing. I never made reference to the June 12th election being the election that will number their days. I spoke about an election, and really I was referencing the national election.
Honorable AG, the Honorable Member is accurate. In fact, he hasn't even spoken as yet on this.
He spoke about an election, and that election will determine the number of days that we have in this assembly.
Yeah.
And Mr. Speaker, 13 LLAs are not contested by that side. 98 constituencies are not contested. A total of 291 constituencies are not contested, meaning that the People's Progressive Party will, without going to the election, win 291 constituencies whose days are numbered. We have not even gone to the elections. We have not gone to the elections yet, and we already win 291 seats, and they have won none. And they're telling us about whose days are numbered. Mr. Ramjatan had to leave because he's not contesting any. And he's telling people about their days are numbered. But I am happy that they're saying these things, and due to technology, the people are hearing. In the same way that they denied that they pulled that mace and broke it. The mace, yes, they denied that this morning. And we will run the footage and we will play the speech. As they're grabbing the mace, the speaker who spoke this morning will be hard telling the people we didn't pull the mace. That tape coming out this afternoon. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable AG. And now for the Honorable Member, Mr. Robeson, to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. I want to thank the honorable member, Ms. Gita Chandan Edmond, for her effusive support of the bill, of the amendment. Effusive support. And I also want to acknowledge clearly the presentation made by the Honorable Attorney General Anil Nandlal, inclusive of his laterals in respect of whose days are numbered, in respect of our total approach to the legislation we bring to this honorable house. Yes, and I hope that the honorable member, Ms. Geeta Chandan, would remain somehow in this house as it goes forward. I noticed that she is indeed my shadow and not the former member who just exited, my erstwhile friend, who who whose closet I have. I have his closet. And, with that bit of levity, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask that we proceed forward with consideration of the bill. That it bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, I now put a question that the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023, Bill number 7 of 2023, be read the second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it. Let the bill be read a second time.
Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023, Bill number 7 of 2023.
Honorable members, we will resolve ourselves into committee to consider the clauses of the bill. Honorable members, we are now in committee, and I propose the question that clauses 1 and 2 form part of the bill. I now put a question that clauses 1 and 2 now form part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it. Clauses 1 and 2 now form part of the bill. Honorable members, I now put a question that the bill be reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Ayes have it. Let the Assembly resume. Honorable Minister of Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to report that the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023, Bill number 7 of 2023, was considered in committee clause by clause and was passed without amendment. I move that the bill be now read the third time and pass as printed.
Honorable members, the question is that the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023, Bill number 7 of 2023, be read a third time and pass as printed. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Let the bill be read a third time.
Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023, Bill number 7 of 2023.
Thank you. Honorable members, we now will proceed with the second bill, the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Bill 2023. Honorable Minister of Human Services and Social Security, the Honorable Dr. Vindhya Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that the Combating of Trafficking in Persons Bill 2023, Bill number 6 of 2023, published on the 18th of April 2023, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is a significant bill, one that is of great importance to our country and will have great impact on the lives of many across the length and breadth of Guyana. I rise to present this bill, which tackles one of the worst scourges which exists in our world today, and literally snatches an individual's life, rights, and freedom. And it is to such an extent that it puts that individual in an inhumane, cruel, callous position where they literally have no control over their life. I believe that this bill deserves a place in our legislative cache as it speaks to many of our fundamental rights, notably freedom. Today, we all have the opportunity to support this bill, which strengthens Guyana's response to trafficking in persons. This is a robust, comprehensive piece of legislation constituted of key measures synonymous with international best practices and our dynamic socio-political needs. Trafficking in persons, some people call it modern-day slavery, but whichever way you refer to it, it's a violation of human rights. And this bill is intended to repeal and replace the existing Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act of 2005, thereby protecting the rights of individuals and preventing and combating trafficking of persons within or across the borders of Guyana. The bill in its current construct has benefited from a few years of intensive work from both local and international agencies, interagency and wider consultations, and has been minutely scrutinized over the last 2 years. I must sincerely thank the technical teams that worked on this bill, including those from the Ministry of Legal Affairs, specifically Ms. Joanne Bond and her team, and also the teams from the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security and the Ministry of Home Affairs, notably the head of the CTIP unit, Ms. Tanisha Corbin-Williams, and Mr. Daniel Griffith from the Ministry of Home Affairs. It is their dedicated efforts that would have yielded much of the input that this bill has in its current form. The objective of this bill is to prescribe measures to combat trafficking in persons, including children. And it sets out a litany of criminal offenses with extraterritorial effect. And this extraterritorial effect facilitates partnership and cooperation between Guyana and other states to prevent and suppress trafficking in persons. And of course, it gives a wider scope to punish offenders. In fact, there are 137 countries in the world that experience trafficking in persons every day. Guyana is not immune to this. This happens in Guyana, but our government is committed to this robust, strong response. And here we are today with this piece of legislation that forms part of the arsenal against trafficking in persons. When we speak to trafficking in persons, we know that it has no face. It affects men, it affects women, it affects children of all walks of life. It is sometimes described as a hidden crime. And because of that, there is need for much public awareness and education, and that has been happening. But trafficking in persons speaks to recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other means of coercion, or by abduction, fraud, deception, use of power or a position of vulnerability, or by giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. That is the definition. Exploitation comes in many forms. It is inclusive of sexual exploitation and forced labor, but not limited to those. And in our national context, it can happen on the coast, whether we speak of the urban coastline or in remote and rural communities, and yes, even in the hinterland. And we look at certain sectors, certain areas where this might be perpetrated easier than others, notably the entertainment industry, forestry, mining industries, domestic services, and shops, to name a few of the places where you can find this. From 2020 to 2023, the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security received 151 reports of trafficking in persons. Now, in addition to this, the ministry's CTIP department was able to identify over that period 790 alleged victims of trafficking. If there is nothing else, that tells how important it is at this juncture to introduce a bill of this nature that definitely pushes this agenda of a response. In 2023, there were 3 convictions. What was noticeable about 2 of those convictions is that there was restitution, and this bill also speaks to that. When we look at the legislation before us, it has many stringent measures, and it is envisaged that these stringent measures will bring more perpetrators to justice. It also recognizes the victim. It gives voice to the victim. It also gives recompense to that person who would have lost much in their life or their life through this whole process of trafficking, moving them within the construct of the legislation to where we want them to be, to a life of stability, where they can feel safe and secure and move forward with their life. But more importantly, it is restoring a fundamental human right. While the bill is expansive and it can be read from cover to cover, I would like to highlight a few areas of note in this bill, which speak to the severity of the crime and the commensurate measures that this bill espouses. Some would not disagree that the heinous nature of trafficking requires harsh or punitive measures. And it is important to see within the framework of this bill that all of the measures that are within the bill are austere, severe, or harsh, and should act as a deterrent to persons who wish to perpetuate and perpetrate the crime of trafficking. This also should send a signal to victims who are trafficked that this bill espouses support, assistance, and redress for what would have taken place in their life. In fact, if you peruse part 2 of this bill, there are criminal offenses set out. It provides that trafficking in persons is an offense, first of all, and anyone who commits this offense is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for 5 years. Conviction on indictment carries a penalty of life imprisonment. In both instances, restitution should be ordered by the court. And in all instances where there is restitution, property may be forfeited. Significant fines and charges and convictions are also listed when it comes to attempts of, conspiracy to, or complicit acts in trafficking, which widens the net as we want it to when it comes to eradicating trafficking, not only focused on the principal offender, but those who are complicit or support that offender in carrying out this grave crime of trafficking of persons. I will refer to the bill from time to time to illustrate the punitive measures commensurate with the gravity of this crime, with due consideration of all those involved and affected. It holds accountable, again, not only the primary actor or the individual, but it even holds accountable corporate bodies which may be involved in trafficking of that offender. As I share with you, I would like to look at some of the clauses, some of the sections of the bill, and this one falls within part 2 of the bill, subsection 3.4.3. A person who counsels, procures, or commands any other person to commit an offense under this section commits an offense and is liable to be indicted either as an accessory before the fact to the principal offense together with the principal offender or after the conviction of the principal offender. And this is significant because in the legislation or the crafting of the legislation, it holds everyone accountable. To be indicted of the substantive offense, whether the principal offender has or has not been previously convicted or is not amenable to justice. And 5, any person who for the purpose of trafficking in persons and acting or purporting to act as another person's employer, manager, supervisor, contractor, employment agent, or solicitor of clients, such as a pimp, knowingly procures, destroys, conceals, removes, confiscates, or possesses any travel document or other government identification document, whether actual or purported, belonging to another person, commits an offense and is liable to summary conviction to a fine of $1 million together with imprisonment for 5 years. And just these two pulled out of part 2 speaks to the wide ambit of this very comprehensive piece of legislation. Part 2 also provides the court with comprehensive sentencing guidelines and a number of aggravated circumstances where the sentence of a person can be adjusted, that person being convicted for trafficking in persons. All of the sentences, all of the measures include stiff fines where judgments may be in excess of $1 million, forfeiture of property is involved, including the conveyance, if that conveyance was used to transport the victims. Imprisonment and additional terms of imprisonment could be a part of those measures if fines are not paid. Part 2 also provides for ancillary offenses. Section 9 is replete with various scenarios and the addition of years to any sentence. And I just will share a few of those from section. As factually appropriate, the following adjustments to the sentence of a person convicted on indictment for trafficking in persons may apply. If the convicted person used, threatened use, or caused another to use or threaten use of a dangerous weapon, 2 years may be added to the sentence. In other words, there's cumulative measures applied to any sentence based on the nature of the trafficking offense and how that trafficking offense occurred. There are also other measures if in the course of trafficking or subsequent exploitation, the convicted person recklessly caused a victim to be exposed to a life-threatening illness, or if the convicted person intentionally caused the victim to become addicted to any drug or medication, 5 years may be added to the sentence. And I think this is important because in the world in which we live, many of these crimes continue and perpetrators seem to feel that the long arm of the law will not get to them. This piece of legislation that is being considered here today definitely espouses not only the punitive measures, but that the law is really wide-reaching or far-reaching and will definitely encompass many of the offenders. Section 13 of Part 2 sets out very clearly that a body corporate may also be guilty of trafficking in persons and any ancillary offenses, and hefty penalties are also levied by this bill. In fact, when the body corporate is referred to in the bill, it is in Section 13 said that this body corporate may be fined $10 million. I know an amendment has been proposed by an honorable member, and I feel this amendment does not change the concept nor the thrust of what is being done. What I would like to propose is a further amendment to that, not less than $10 million, which is the honorable member's amendment, and not more, so I will add to this, not more than $15 million in keeping with how the law should be crafted. So I believe coming from that member too, there is solidity in the support for this bill. I will construe that based on us trying to curb the scourge of trafficking in persons. Each subsection takes into account the complexities of the involvement, and if we move further into the piece of legislation, we will be able to see that a body corporate or its director, manager, secretary, agent, or any other officer concerned with the management of the body corporate has been convicted of an offense under this act, the court shall have the power, in addition to the power to impose penalties prescribed for the stated offense, to do several things of great importance. One, report the body corporate's business license, order the body corporate to be wound up, forfeit the assets and properties of the body corporate, or prohibit the body corporate from performing any further activities. And this speaks, again, to the severity of the measures commensurate with what is considered the gravity of the crime of trafficking in persons. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to children, as mentioned in the bill. And this is very important because the bill does not reference adults alone. It speaks to children and how children ought to be treated in terms of best practices when it is related to trafficking in children. What constitutes the offense against the child? And that's an important thing because it sets the foundation for all the measures to follow. Any person, this is subsection 3, sorry. This speaks to children, and where children are concerned, there must be every interest of the child to the forefront of what is happening. The child's statement must be done in a protective environment. The child should be spoken to in a language that the child understands. The child should be taken into protective custody. The child should never be placed in a situation where it further exposes that child to any danger. And the child also, in all of the various sections and subsections of this piece of legislation, as it relates to children, should be treated in such a manner that the interests and the fundamental rights of that child will always be protected. Mr. Speaker, Part 3 of the bill speaks to the Child Care and Protection Agency, and it is evident that the interest of the child is paramount in this legislation, as the Child Care and Protective Agency must collaborate at all times with the task force and the Combating and Trafficking in Persons unit whenever children are involved in trafficking. And child victims should be provided with every comfort and support that they require to get them through this harrowing process. Mr. Speaker, as we move to victims in general, this bill, again, is pellucid when it comes to giving victims closure, giving victims a voice, giving victims redress, and it's specifically detailed in many sections in the bill. Those persons conversing with trafficking in persons understand the pain and the horror visited on victims, and this bill addresses this in several impactful ways, ensuring that these persons are on an easier and better path to return their life to normalcy, or as close as possible take their life to normalcy. Part 3 of the bill provides for the court to conduct case management procedures to ensure that cases are heard expeditiously. And this is important because when things are drawn out, that can affect the course of the case and could also allow the perpetrators to get off scot-free if they threaten or they even intimidate or threaten that person while waiting for the court to proceed. This part also stipulates that victims may be eligible to participate in any applicable witness protection program, and it also provides that victims must be protected whenever they're questioned or interviewed, and that must be done in privacy. This part makes provision for victims to be provided with assistance, support, which will include anything from counseling to housing, financial support, employment, and even immigration services. This is an important introduction or intervention into the legislation because it clearly assures the victim that their circumstance is catered for, their safety is catered for, and that in everything that they're doing, they're protected. Restitution perhaps is the biggest intervention or the biggest measure when it comes to someone who has experienced trafficking in person. Restitution speaks to recompense for loss or injury provided to victims, and this intervention in the legislation emphatically sends a signal to victims that their loss and suffering is not just noticed, but the perpetrator must offer redress. And this is spoken to in Part 2, Section 7 and subsections 1 to 7. The court shall order restitution pursuant to the list set out in the second schedule, seeking to achieve so many different things. And I will share some of what you're hoping to achieve and why and what the court is compensating victims for. The court restitution shall compensate the victim for any of the following: cost of medical and psychological treatment, cost of physical and occupational therapy and rehabilitation, cost of necessary transportation, temporary housing, child care, or the movement of victim to a temporary safe residence. It continues along that vein. And I was happy in 2023 when of 3 cases, 2 cases got restitution. This is a step in the right direction, but now we are paving the way for every case to have restitution, which is something that every victim should feel assured of. Importantly, in all of this, the absence of the victim shall not prejudice the victim's right to restitution, nor the immigration status, nor the return of the victim to his or her home country. Restitution shall be paid to the victim promptly as specified by the courts, and advances for forfeiture to ensure that restitution is paid. And it really gives the commitment of moving that victim's life to stability. The second schedule to the Act provides the information that courts will use to compute the amount of restitution that the convicted person will pay to victims of trafficking. The legislation is significant because, in addition to existing laws, it emphasizes our government's zero tolerance for trafficking, which is necessary to combat a crime where perpetrators may be elusive and prey on the fears of victims and impose that fear in such a way that it sometimes causes that victim not to want to come forward, not to want to testify, not to want to proceed in the manner that we want to, where it leads to a conviction. We've also seen that Guyana has maintained its Tier 1 ranking for 5 years. And this speaks also to the level of work that has been ongoing in terms of education and awareness. And in this bill, there is mention of the Combating and Trafficking in Persons Unit, the establishment of that. But remember, this repeals another bill. So it is already referring to what has been established in alignment with the previous bill. Going back to the victim, many times too, victims feel that their behavior or their lifestyle or something that they may have done may have caused this on them. The legislation also speaks to that, as it stipulates that consent of past sexual behavior or history of the victim is irrelevant. This part 2, provides that the legal age of consent to sex or marriage cannot be used as a defense to trafficking in person. A further protection that this part offers is that the victim is immune from prosecution of immigration offenses. Part 4 of this bill, moving forward, relates to investigation and what happens in the court. And it is always beneficial that records be kept, data be collected, and this part of the legislation speaks to that. It also provides that paper committals are permitted for indictable matters. And this is an important thing because it reduces or prevents entirely any kind of interpersonal engagement or even confrontation between the victim and the offender. The Counter in Trafficking Persons Unit is an important component of the entire legislation. And this unit has over time focused on educating the public and training of many persons, both in government agencies, also agencies that are considered at risk or considered ports of entry for persons who are trafficked. And they've worked in so many agencies, including law enforcement agencies, service industries, food, health, mining, and forestry sectors. 2 years ago, the Ministry of Human Services launched the Stop 592 campaign, which is simply Stop Trafficking of Persons. This was launched in Region 7, and here we give visibility to this scourge that affects so many people all the time. The ministry has also developed a hand signal that is used by victims to seek help. And several PSAs and messages would have been developed using the multimedia approach. And there's a 24-hour Spanish hotline where persons can make their reports in addition to the English-speaking hotline. Now, for all of this to work, there must be integration, there must be cohesion, there must be sort of an inclusion of persons in the movement against trafficking in persons. And here is where the legislation speaks to the establishment of the ministerial task force. The ministerial task force, in accordance with this legislation, must be appointed by the president. This task force is to comprise of members of various sectors, including immigration, law enforcement, legal affairs, foreign affairs, public health, Amerindian affairs, human services, and social security. It is to be co-chaired by the Ministers of Home Affairs and Human Services. And this task force is to develop a plan of action that focuses on many important components that deal with specifically trafficking in person, and also includes the compilation of a report coming out of data collection to be presented to Cabinet. This task force also ensures that there's coordination between the key agencies and stakeholders. As we move through the bill and we get to more of what the bill espouses and has enshrined within it, Part 5 speaks to misuse of transportation in committing a trafficking in persons offense, and it also specifically directs one's attention to the ensuring of safe handling and traveling of children within or into Guyana without a parent, guardian, or responsible adult. It speaks to the kind of documentation that must be presented, and it also speaks to areas that are high risk for exploitation, bringing the attention to those persons who are at ports of entry and exit to the occurrences that may happen under trafficking in persons. It also recommends that government shall coordinate educational activities with anybody and everybody within the transport industry. Here now, my colleague, the Minister of Home Affairs, is to appoint a committee to monitor the quality of travel and identity documents issued by the competent authority. When we move further into this piece of legislation, it goes to the general and miscellaneous provisions and speaks to the criminal procedure, and it also speaks to the Child Care and Protection Act, which is amended to place responsibility for children who are victims of trafficking within the framework and mechanisms of this act. This part of the legislation provides that the minister may make regulations to give effect to this act and may by order increase any fines provided for under the act. The first schedule to the act sets out the procedure for the national referral mechanism for victims of trafficking. And here I want to say the standard operating procedures, which have been worked on for more than 2 years, those standard operating procedures would have benefited from agencies like the Ministry of Human Services, Ministry of Home Affairs, IOM, and other international agencies which guide the manner in which agencies must coordinate in their response to persons who have been trafficked. There is also a detailed referral pathway, which is now given the full force of the law, being enshrined in the regulations and in the body of the legislation itself. In this, there was also the Caribbean Development Bank that was a part of formalizing guidelines for the investigation and prosecution of trafficking in persons offenses in Guyana. So I make mention of all of this. I make mention of these provisions within the legislation. I make mention of all the work that would have gone into the standard operating procedures, which are now within the legislation itself, to inform this honorable House that it was not just 1 or 2 persons who worked on this. It was a collective effort, and it is a serious attempt, a serious effort by our government to combat trafficking in persons. We have zero tolerance for trafficking in persons, and we are continuing with our mandate as guided by the previous legislation now to this point to have more expansive programs and more expansive responses to trafficking in persons. And this legislation carries with it the weight of a comprehensive and progressive approach that warrants this House's collective support, as this legislation provides a robust framework for justice to be meted out and for victims to get their lives back. Enshrined in this legislation are many austere measures which should serve to not only apprehend the perpetrators, but to deter persons from being complicit in trafficking in persons. It also gives that assurance to those who are experiencing trafficking in persons and those who have experienced being trafficked, that there is a commitment to help them to move on in a safe way with their life. Part 2 of the bill sends a strong message to traffickers. And I hope that as we continue today's debates, everyone will realize the need for this not only to be supported, but to be passed. Because the longer we take to pass this, then we're leaving the gates a little open for those persons. Because what is within this legislation and the manner in which it's crafted, it really deals with a lot of loopholes that may have existed prior to it being introduced. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that as we look at trafficking in persons, it is but one of the many social issues that we face in the world, we face in our country. And there are some things that should always be above any sort of partisanship, but must always be in the interest of every person across the length and breadth of Guyana. And this is one such that should enjoy our absolute support. And I commend this bill to all of the honorable members, especially those who are speaking, for their consideration. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Our next speaker is the Honorable Nishwar Jaiprashad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pleasant good afternoon, colleagues.
I stand here to support the Bill number 6 of 2023, the Combating of Trafficking in Person Bill 2023. As I was listening to the Honorable Minister, I know that it is an opportune time for us to be able to pool our resources together so that we can be able to achieve protection and safety and security for our Guyanese population and even non-Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, this bill is very much needed and is a timely piece of proposal that will bring a sense of security to all and most importantly, protects the current and future generation. This piece of document will cause many to come in line with the laws, and it will give great concern to the persons who are bent on oppressing and preventing the freedom of individuals. It will bring a sense of protection to human rights and dignity in this country. Beyond any doubt, we will be supporting this bill, but we have some concern that will be discussed here today so that, if possible, those considerations can be taken so that we can be able to have a good piece that will represent all the citizens or all concerned. But before I go into that, the concept of the bill, Mr. Speaker, I wish to point out that during discussion held with some senior citizens in this country, it came out that this bill is very much appropriate. But one particular individual indicated that he is 70 years old and it is very hard for him to survive on $1,100 a day. We are proposing protection for Guyanese young people, persons who will be victims of trafficking, and we need to pay a little bit more emphasis and respect to our older folks. I bring this to say that the 33,000 that we are giving to our senior citizens who have given their life to this nation is very much of great concern that we need to take into consideration. Mr. Speaker, protection of victims of trafficking in person. We know that this falls directly under the Ministry of Home Affairs, but for the past few days, we have been faced with so many humiliation coming from senior officials from the Ministry of Home Affairs. Mr. Speaker, with this recent development, I am fearful that if we can fix our house in order, it will be difficult for us to take up so many more additional duties and responsibilities. I thought that only Guyanese watching, but it seems as if though there are other people elsewhere watching as well. Human trafficking is very, very dangerous and is evident in many countries. We are happy that amendment to the 2005 bill can come to the House, the Honorable House, so that we can be able to put systems in place to help all of our persons who will be identified. Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw to the attention of the Honorable House, to the Honorable Minister of Human Services and Social Security, that the amendments in terms of enforcing the The amendments as it relates to the fine, I must say that that is very, very much appropriate, that stringent measures are taken so that it will deter those who, I must thank my colleague for proposing that piece. Mr. Speaker, Section 26 indicate how will the unit indicates that accommodation will be for victims. But we are seeing here that currently there are 5 shelters in 3 regions. I did not see any specificity in terms of the other regions, but we know that person being trafficked is a sensitive, serious situation, issue, and to reduce transportation from the other ends of the nation to the central point, we are proposing that shelters be established in the region or in the county, so that we can be able, we know that we have some, but we are not saying that, we are saying that propose proper infrastructure so that in all administrative regions we will be able to service our population. Section 26(1), assistance to victim in terms of psychological counseling in a language the victim uses and understand. We know that according to the bill, there will be a 6-month period whereby the task force will set up systems in place to address so many things. But, Mr. Speaker, why wait for a 6-month period to set up system? Why can't we start the process in terms of having individuals being trained in the various languages that we are anticipating? I know that the Ministry of Education will be part of the task force, but do we have a system in place whereby CPC are in the process of advertising options in terms of foreign languages that will cater for the service of the population? At the present, because of the open border and human rights agreements, we are having many foreigners in our nation who are not speaking English language, and it is posing a difficulty at the moment in terms of the language experience that they are having and the learning experience that they are having in the school system. So I was hoping that the bill would be a little bit more specific in terms of suggesting to us what MOE will be doing so that the population can be better serviced. In addition, the Ministry of Business needs to be listed as well, because this is and tourism, and included so that protection of the people and visitors and all that falls under this category will be protected. Because we observe that there are some situations whereby in the business fraternity, there are practices and malpractices that promotes violation of rights of people. In conclusion, I wish to say that the Rights of the Child Commission needs to be included, Ethnic Relation Commission, and the religious body, so that we can be able to have a more comprehensive unit to service the people of this country and all that the bill will cover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member Jai Prashad. I now call on the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Ben, to make his contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can of course understand why the Honorable Member Paul doesn't want me to speak again. But I have to speak on this bill. I'm a member of the Ministerial Task Force of Trafficking in Persons as it stands now. I wish to point out that we do have a trafficking in persons unit which has been fairly active, working in collaboration with the Ministry of Human Services and Social Protection, that under our direction, enabling and working with the Guyana Police Force, we in total, working with the police, with the Ministry of Human Services, have been able to have a number of successes in relation to this problem of trafficking in persons. I first have to say, to identify, following on what the Minister of Human Services was saying in relation to the heinous nature of this matter in terms of trafficking in persons. We have had a situation, and I would say again that we've inherited a situation where a large number of persons have been coming through Guyana, some smuggled, some trafficked, and some moving between smuggling, being smuggled and trafficked. And of course, trafficking in persons and human smuggling is one of the significant transnational organized crimes that we have to continue to work at diligently. I would say if I look at some of our numbers here, and I think Minister Vinay Prasad did refer to some, in 2022, we had 22 cases where people were actively apprehended and interrogated, and with some arrests. We had 22 operations with 247 victims screened and interviewed, and 1 conviction was achieved. In 2023, we have, so far year to date, 5 cases were put before the court, 12 operations were conducted, 190 suspected victims interviewed and screened, and of course, 2 convictions. And recently, 117 persons were Venezuelan nationals, of which 130 persons in total were females and 60 males. 5 persons were charged, 4 Guyanese and 1 Venezuelan. And recently, a couple of weeks ago, 1 person was convicted in the prison and is facing further charges. And we anticipate as we go through the year, there will be more cases brought to bear and persons brought to bear in the courts in relation to this matter. Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is indeed a transnational organized crime. It is a manifestation of interlinked transnational organized crimes which we're facing at the moment. It is not simply the question of trafficking in persons itself, but linked also to questions of drugs, of guns, of money laundering, of smuggling of gold and other materials, all transnational organized crimes which are related in one way or the other. And the criminal actors in some of these, in one activity, is also related to activities in other spheres related to this matter. So if he's involved in smuggling or human trafficking, or trafficking in persons, he may have an interest in the smuggling of guns or drugs or other collateral issues, negative ones of interest in the criminal sphere. If we look at the statistics, the data, we would have inherited a situation where there was a rapid surge in the numbers of persons who are coming through the country and be recorded by the Immigration Department one way or the other, either by way of passport or coming across our borders, which are euphemistically stated to be porous. And I would always say that it's not only the borders which are porous, but the internals are porous too. So we have that challenge, but if I were to pull up some of the statistics related to persons coming through the country over a number of years and who they claim or was claimed were being put out or coming in for one purpose or the other, and if you look at the figures of persons who came through at one